Hi, everyone. Welcome to Season 4, Episode 10 of the ESG Experience, the podcast about all things ESG and beyond. In case you were wondering why Huey Lev isn't doing the introduction like she usually does, today we're doing a special segment called Winters and Winters, featuring myself, Michelle Winters from Conservice, and Dan Winters, no relation, from GRESB. Hey, Dan, how are you?
Doing great, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
It's been a while, so we're really excited. We used to do a Winters and Winters podcast previously because I'm Michelle Winters, for those of you that don't know me, over in Conservice, and I'm joined by Dan Winters, all the way from the GRESB side, from different sides of the country, by the way. I'm on the West Coast, you're on the East Coast.
And I've got two icebreakers too. First one is it GRESB or GRESB? That's the number one question that I always receive. And the answer is yes. Tomato, tomato. 95% of the people will say GRESB if you want to be part of the 95, but there's always the alternative. Second icebreaker is, are you and I related? That answer is no. We happen to have a similar last name, but that is all.
I do get asked that quite frequently, and I find that to be pretty funny, actually. But no, just really cool last names, really cool people. Maybe that's a good way. And I'm within the GRESB camp, by the way. That's how it was supposed to be originally. That's what I was told 10 years ago, so I'm sticking with it.
Well, I'm coming into our conversation with several things on my mind. I've got 3 and a bonus. You have some things on your mind too, I'm confident.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm just excited. It's nice to be able to connect, kind of share what's happening with others in this industry. So yeah, Dan, tell me, what's on your mind? What's happening in the GRESB space?
Well, there's 3 big advances that GRESB has made in 2024, besides just the incremental changes to the assessment, the real estate assessment or the infrastructure assessment. And so, we're going to set that aside, and I want to talk about 3 major steps forward. First one is a carbon footprint report that we are offering to our institutional investor members. And these are the big pension plans: CalPERS, CalSTRS, New York Common Fund, the UN Staff Pension Plan, and all of the others that were the original founders of GRESB. The asset owners that are putting the capital out to work, that the participants, the private equity firms and the real estate investment trusts, are then managing that capital, investing it in real estate, right? So we have these 2 groups, and GRESB sits in the middle of them. So the first big advance is a carbon footprint report that we're making available to our big institutional investor members. The second one are real statistics and real solutions, also part of the carbon footprint report, but most applicable to the participants. And we're going to dig into that one, I'm sure, during our chat here. The third one is the launch of the GRESB Accredited Professional Program. I'm confident that a lot of the folks that are tuned in today have taken and passed the LEAD AP exam and have on their business card a LEAD AP. So now you can also become a GRESB accredited professional. Very excited. And I'm pleased to let you know, Michelle, that I was the first person on the planet to pass the GRESB AP exam, because I took the alpha test and I provided an awful lot of feedback to continue to make it better.
Nice. Well, I can't claim to be the first, but I am excited to hear how the GRESB AP one goes. Do we have a long, how many questions are we talking about here? How hard is this test?
Oh, I was asked to complete 100 questions. I have set the bar for everybody to take a tiny step over to pass. So I will be very transparent. I scored 77 out of 100. Right?
Okay.
That was pretty good, right?
Sure.
And I don't know, because I haven't taken the one that's out in the marketplace right now, if it's been reduced or to lesser questions. But I'm aware that it takes about an hour and a half of time. The first edition is designed for the project managers, the team leaders for a GRESB submission, for like yourself and Andrea and others that are on your team. And it's really to show competency within GRESB and the concepts that drive both the industry on an ESG standpoint, and then some real technical details about the assessment, which is where that's not my strong suit, the technical things. And so that's where I started to lose some points, but that's okay. Right? I am aware that somebody else out there scored a 95. It's possible.
Okay. I like hearing that. Yeah. I remember back in the day, the LEAD AP one, I studied for months on that. So I'll be interested to hear how the GRESB one continues to progress forward.
So I studied none. and I just went into it cold. So it's okay, right? If you know your stuff, you're going to do great.
So for those that are listening, that are interested, how do you learn more? Tell me, where do you go to kind of figure out more about the GRESB?
Well, first off, you're part of this webinar. So that's your early morning, if you will. Now, what we've so far released it only to our partners, our premier partners and our global partners. Gave them a little head start. Wanted to have highly experienced professionals take this, and also if there was any feedback or any glitches to let us know. I believe that next week, call it May 1st, there will be the opportunity for individuals to come in and use a credit card and pay. There's a small fee associated with it. It's 475 euros. The nice thing about the AP is it will persist for a year, right? Everyone has their accreditation for a year. And then in order to re-up, different from how other accreditations work, oftentimes you have to do continuing education and you have all these reporting requirements and you need to go to conferences and seminars and all that stuff. With GRESB, you just take another exam the next year. It's lighter, it's easier, it's half the cost, and twice as cool.
Awesome. Well, so that sounds some exciting news for the partners, and then for any other participants that might be interested. Before we get to you didn't tell me what your fourth item was, that bonus item. We'll circle back to it though.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very excited about that.
Let's hear about more on the carbon footprint that you were mentioning and how that stakeholder that might be engaged. Tell me a little bit more about that and kind of who you are looking at with those new services or new tools, I guess I'll say.
Perfect. So I don't know, 3, 5, 7 years ago, the Net Asset Owners Alliance was created, right? It's part of the UN. They convened this group. Mark Carney was the big pusher behind this. So there are 150 plus institutional investment portfolios, big pension plans that have signed, and they have committed to net zero by 2050, 2045, 2040, whatever their commitment is. So once you make that commitment, that's the first step on a long journey. Then the chief investment officer of the big pension plan, and just to put this in scale, CalPERS 400 billion plus, CalSTRS similar, right? And so then you have assets in stocks and bonds and hedge funds and private equity, and then your real estate allocation is typically somewhere between 7 and 15% of that overall portfolio. So if you're running the real estate, the chief investment officer is looking at you and saying, what's our carbon footprint? Whoa, right? So let's do some quick math. 10% of 400 billion is 40 billion. And in order to put that money to work and put that money out the door, these pension plans typically have 30, 40, 50 plus positions in Blackstone, KKR, Carlyle, name all of the different money managers that are out there. And so the investment officer is looking at the portfolio manager on the real estate side and saying, give me that carbon footprint. And first thing they do is they dig into those GRESB reports and they start to tally them up. So if you've got that going for you, that's great, but it only gets you so far. Mm-hmm. Now you have funds that are dark in the system, and the ones that are even in the system, sometimes they've done 100% perfect job with their data. Oftentimes that's not the case, and especially in retail, in industrial, and multifamily, where you have the split incentives, where it's very challenging to get the data, there are holes. So the carbon footprint report fills those gaps. It allows our investor members to build up their portfolio based upon the real data that came in the benchmark in 2023 and what will be in 2024. It then fills in the gaps with those that are in the benchmark that didn't have a complete data set. And then it also allows them to use estimates to fill in all of the non-participating funds in GRESB, so they can go confidently to their chief investment officer and say, here is our carbon footprint report. It is made up of 65% real data, 35% estimates from GRESB, the best global institutional real estate data set in the world. And this is where we are in 2022. And now we're on the journey to get to zero by 2050.
Awesome. So it's really, if I kind of narrow that down a little bit, it's taking advantage of the data set that GRESB has. And when you're having a larger conversation up the chain in terms of your greenhouse gas emissions, there's maybe more acceptable, we'll say, arms of what you can include for some of those estimates. And so you guys are helping to provide that gap of data using the larger GRESB data set. That's kind of interesting, actually, and I'm interested to hear more of how that goes and the feedback you continue to get, because I think that could be a great way to kind of tell that story to those institutional investors. Now, what you'll probably hear a lot of, when we hear about gaps in GRESB, everyone gets very concerned because I'll have one property that has 9 months worth of data, but now I have a gap of 3 months worth of data that I can't fill. And GRESB has very specific requirements for estimates when you're submitting your data to GRESB. So this is not a replacement of that. This is not even aligned with that, because that individual participant data set, you have your own requirements as it relates to filling in those gaps. So just making sure if someone's like, wait, is GRESB filling in the gaps, or do I have to make estimates in the gaps? They're kind of two different conversations that are happening.
So you're using all the keywords. I want to highlight those. So submitting to GRESB and participating in the benchmark, right? That's a different group. Those are the private equity funds, the separate accounts, and the REITs. So you're right. There are rules that say real data only. We understand that there might be a month or two gap, and therefore in the reference guide, there are some rules to kind of shore up that gap. So you've got something for an individual asset for 12 months, but that isn't what we've been talking about. We've been talking about estimates that come as a product of the entire 170,000 buildings that came into GRESB last year. So just for metrics, 2,084 portfolios were submitted to the benchmark in 2023, covering 170,000 buildings. Roughly 2/3 of those have data for the building at the building level, but that means 1/3 do not. Mm-hmm. And so if you're an institutional investor subscribing to this data, those gaps are a problem. If you're a submitter and you're looking to gain those points, right? There's a couple nuanced rules, but believe me, you cannot take our estimates and resubmit them to us and call it good, because we can't accept estimates to fuel our estimates.
It would just be a constant circle, wouldn't it?
It would.
No, and I think you said it right, is it's just different users for the information that you're sharing, right? And who's providing that information versus who might be reviewing the information. So kind of two different.
Yeah, and a useful way to think about this is we have information givers and information takers. Mm-hmm. Big pension plans are information takers.
Yeah.
Private equity funds, the participants in the benchmark, the REITs, they're information givers. So the givers need to do best efforts, real data.
Yep.
We know it's not possible yet. We're getting there. We're close. And so if you're a taker, you would like as complete of a data set as you can. So we're filling in those gaps.
I like it. Interesting. Well, that'll be fun to hear more on. And as I said, as you get more feedback from those that might be looking to utilize it. But what was so we talked about kind of that first bucket, those from the investor standpoint. Let's talk about the second bucket that you mentioned with the real solutions, real benchmark. Talk to me about that.
So those that participate have would like to understand how they're doing in context. So they've submitted their buildings. They can see within their portfolio which buildings have high or low energy use intensities, carbon footprint, or not, GHG emissions, right? So that's good to self-compare against your portfolio. How does that compare against others in the benchmark? And how does it compare more globally is really the question that most organizations have. And Real Solutions provides those benchmarks. So if you have an industrial portfolio in Canada, there are all kinds of other industrial buildings in Canada that have submitted to GRESB. So based upon climate zones, country, property type, we can draw distribution curves from all of the other data that comes into GRESB to show what the median, what the 75 and 25 percentile is. And then we can put that in context for that Canadian portfolio to say, here's how you're doing, good, better, best, where are you? Super helpful.
Yeah, and it's an interesting aspect in terms of the data set that we're talking about, right? Anytime you think about comparative data analytics, It really comes down to, okay, what's the larger data set that you are reviewing against? And so in this example, it's the GRESB data set. We also have Energy Star, which has a similar aspect related to the Energy Star data set. And then you have others, on the Conservice side, we look at the complete Conservice data set. With GRESB, I would like to think that they're higher performing buildings, same with maybe even with an Energy Star. So I think there's some interesting aspects there that could be worthwhile looking at, but it's all comes down to the data set you want to be comparing against, and you'll probably get different answers between the GRESB, the Energy Star, another third party like Conservice will give you differing results.
Yes, and I just come back to what our data set looks like, which is institutional quality. The big private equity firms and REITs are the ones that are providing that data in. So that's what you're comparing against. In Energy Star, there are schools and courthouses and other things that are out there. And then with the solution providers like Conservice, you will have a much wider array of folks. It might be you and I that own an apartment building, and we might end up in the Conservice data set, but that might not be an institutional quality type of asset.
Well, and I think you're seeing too on the GRESB side, there's a lot of data verification that might be taking place within the data set, which is really interesting. Again, and also from a whole building data aspect, where I think a lot of where we think of on the Conservice side, we get into the common area versus the whole building versus all of the asset type, which I know is kind of similar to what GRESB might be looking at as well, but it's just different data sets you're comparing to. So I think that'll be interesting to see in the GRESB world, maybe another layer in that peer comparison that we all know and love within GRESB.
You bet.
All right. So I like this. You've got something for the investors. You've got something for the partners with the GRESB AP. You got something for the participants. What was the bonus thing that I should get really excited about?
Well, now we have something for the industry. There are probably some folks that may remember back in 2016, 17, 18, we had the GRESB debt assessment, right? And this was all about lenders on real estate and how integrated the concepts around ESG are within three major things that they do. Know your customer, know your collateral to get you to that moment of truth, which is called a loan. And once that's out there, know your book. Okay. So in 2018, the debt assessment was set aside. We were a small organization, couldn't continue to carry it. And I found myself carrying two jobs on the org chart, head of Americas and head of this product. So that was tricky for all of those that are listening. I do not advise two spots on the org chart. That's difficult at best. So we are in the process of bringing this back. And we have convened a lender roundtable made up of many of our long-standing participants, 10-year members at GRESB, some real leading names here in Americas. And we're about to replicate this in EMEA and APAC, right, Europe and Asia Pacific, to receive mind share and feedback and bring the 2018 debt assessment up to 2025 standards. There are issues that have emerged and advanced. Things like net zero. Asking a lender about net zero, we're probably going to hear we don't have any net zero buildings, but that's okay because the theory of change at GRESB is you just keep asking. We're going to ask in 2024. We're going to ask in 2025. By the time we get to 2026, I'm pretty sure there's going to be some loans against some net zero buildings.
Yeah, you kind of keep pushing that envelope, and eventually at some point, someone will find that answer for you.
Because the leaders emerge. Okay. So another thing that, beside the lender roundtable here, something important to know about GRESB is we are celebrating our 15th anniversary with this particular submission cycle. So what that means is 15 years of industry growth, 15 years of progress. And we've seen it on the equity side. We know it can happen on the lender side as well. And now the time is ripe. Because I will tell you, back in 2018, I had a lot of people looking at me like I had three eyes. But now I have an awful lot of people that are saying, should we want to, let's do it. And so that's the spirit that's taken over the industry. It's really cool.
Well, we might still think you have three eyes once in a while, but for the most part, I would agree with that.
Yeah, well,
But no, I think you're right. And I even think back to the days of LEED certifications for those that maybe got into an individual property, and there would be questions like recycled content of a piece of material, and people thought you were absolutely crazy. And now it's on every single cut sheet. I think you're seeing the same thing as it relates to data acquisition. What do you mean I have to get whole building data and data from my tenants? That will never happen in a million years. Now we're making pushes forward to get, it's still difficult, don't get me wrong, there's nuances, but I think we're seeing that progress forward, and I'm excited to see how that'll move even further. Before we maybe spend a little bit of time on some of those challenges in just a minute, tell me really quickly on the lender roundtable, if someone's interested, where should they go? What should they look at? How can they potentially get involved?
Oh, they need to send me an email, right?
Dan, yeah. You've opened yourself up now. You're going to get all these emails directly to you.
Well, so we're looking for existing GRESB members that understand how GRESB works. There are a handful of others in the industry that are thoughtful and engaged, and especially in other countries outside of the US, right? So there's some mortgage brokers in Canada that have stepped forward and wanted to provide their input into the assessment. So this is just, it's more of a coming soon, right? In 2025, we're doing all the groundwork now to be there and help the industry move forward on what is arguably even more important, the lender side, because there's more money on the debt side than there is on the equity side. There's just happens to be less control over the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll come with its own types of challenges, but as well as potential huge for benefits.
So now I would like to learn something from you.
Sure, absolutely.
Tell me what's happening with the building performance standards, right? This has been happening for a while, the local benchmarking ordinances, and now we're really ramping up here in America. I know you're right in the middle of all this stuff. Educate me.
Well, I think it's interesting. You're seeing across the board in the industry we've always had the challenge related to data quality, the accuracy of that, but access to that whole building data. And it's only continuing to be utilized from multiple directions. So GRESB, it's always been important for, we've always talked about the benefit of it, but now it's becoming even more of a regulatory requirement. So most of our customers and those probably listening are familiar with annual ordinance benchmarking. That's been in place for quite a while. There's about 50 ordinances out there based on cities or states, which are, hey, once a year, share your data with me. I don't really care what the data looks like. You could have a horrible performing building. Just share it with me once a year. They then also have some enhanced benchmarking that's out there, which is, hey, every so many years, I need you to do something. So LA has this, New York has this, do an energy audit every so many years, or retro commissioning, whatever it might be. Now they're really pushing it into, hey, nope, sorry, you have to meet a certain performance requirement, right? I need you to hit this threshold by this date. The challenge that we're going to see across the board is every single one of these jurisdictions is completely different timelines, different requirements, different start dates, different aspects you might be looking at for performance. Some are based off energy intensity, some are based off greenhouse gas intensity, some are based off of a comparative baseline. But one of the things that's pretty impactful across the board is now this data, this access to high quality data, whole building data, just hit a whole nother level of importance with significant fines associated with it. This is no longer a volunteer aspect. This is no longer I'll give you a little slap on the wrist if you don't do it. This is potential of millions of dollars in fines for not meeting these requirements. And again, it's not even just sharing the data, it's the performance. So it's even more impactful of making sure that baseline from 2021 is also accurate whole building data. So that I think is one of the biggest conversations we're seeing on our end in this space. And the benefit is I think it'll roll up into GRESB really well. Now we're going to have more access to whole building data, which is exciting. I think you're going to see improvements towards the overall performance of these assets, which of course will be impactful on the GRESB side. But it's just really coming down to the data and having good team members involved with helping you to drive those performance improvements. The other thing I'll note that I think goes into that, though, is when it comes to that quality of the data, we're seeing, and we're biased over here at Conservice because we do a lot of utility bill management, but it's the flow of that data directly from the bills into whatever source it might be for Energy Star or GRESB that's leading to that highest level of accuracy as well. So that's been, I think, exciting to see, and the improvements that are continuously being made in the space for that.
So I know that the building performance standards have been around for a while, but now they're coming with teeth. And that creates a different dynamic, and there's opportunities and challenges with that. So I can imagine myself being a very progressive landlord and have done some things that are cool, like put in electric charging stations. Am I being penalized because that's on my meter? Is there any,
all the nuances.
Oh,
and in some cases, potentially. And I think if, being transparent on this call where everyone's listening, but I don't think all of the jurisdictions have figured out what they want to do with that. I think you're also going to see in the example of, let's take a garden style multifamily community. Historically, the benchmarking ordinance, they treated, maybe 20 buildings in a garden style multifamily community as one property. Our clients look at it as one property. It's probably submitted to GRESB as one property. But BPS might start asking you to think of it as 20 individual buildings that you may or may not need to submit for BPS on. The benefit is you're probably under the square footage requirements at this point. The challenge is that won't last forever. So I think you're also going to see this nuance of how you are thinking of your properties and how you define those property boundaries and the buildings associated with it, and what else is taking place on the properties that you might have to separately meter or communicate in a different way or share back and make the business case work. So I think you're going to see these jurisdictions, while they have teeth and they're out there, I don't think they've figured out everything yet. So you're seeing a lot of the pushback. There was something I heard the other day where someone put out a blog post of like, it's not going to happen. They're going to get so much legal pushed against them and it's never going to come to fruition. I don't think you should hang your hat on that. It's coming. It might get delayed in certain jurisdictions, but BPS is officially moving forward.
Having been around sustainability for 20 years plus, I would offer that viewpoint may help avoid some fines, right? It may delay certain things, but capital is fungible. And people in their capital stack have investors from other places outside of the United States or outside of obviously a city jurisdiction, right? So I observe a game where metrics and measures are required for institutional investors who have, or even lender, whoever, where your capital source is, because of the different pressures from their stakeholders. So while we might be able to, stave off some penalties or things like that, you can't hold back the tidal wave of measure, reduce.
And I do love it continues to pop up in all these different facets, right? As we mentioned, from the investors, from the jurisdictions, from even your own, the stakeholders on the other side, whether that be employees or tenants or residents in these buildings, it's coming from all different directions. Now it's just getting to be a little bit more strict and the requirements for a little bit more transparency. But the good news is it should benefit you in these other ways down the road, right? That's what I'm excited about. All these BPS requirements are going to force the hand for aggregate data. And it's going to force the hand of utility providers to actually start communicating with these operators and with these providers more effectively. And that's something that we've seen to be incredibly beneficial is we got to get to these utility providers and offer to make their lives easier, because then they'll give us the data a little bit more streamlined. We're creating things like EDI connections with them. Hey, now you don't have to send me anything. I'm going to get it through a direct pull, and you don't have to put it into a specific PDF. I'm going to get the raw data and I'll put the PDF out there. So it's all of the ways we can make it easier on the utility providers to get the data, I think will help streamline it and give us better access to.
I think this is a great way to land. There's a lot of progress at hand, and sometimes it feels like it's slow and we're in the midst of just doing the same thing over and over, but it's not true, right? There are are advances that are happening around us and that we've all experienced to get to this point over 15 years. And I think the future is quite bright. And I say 15 years selfishly because of GRESB when we were started in 2009. Certainly there have been, LEAD was 2001, Energy Star 1999, and people way before that too.
15 years. So maybe that's a good way of, maybe wrapping up our first session. But any big celebration from GRESB? Like 15 years? What are we doing next year?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. So October 1st is the date of our GRESB data release. And so we had an event that was set for this spring that we moved, or we shifted the date to be on August 1st in New York City at Chelsea Market, the GRESB Institutional Investor Forum. And so I am hopeful that we have a big birthday cake that shows up. Yeah, see, that'll be a lot of fun. And then we've also announced, well, I don't think it's been announced, but I've set the date. Maybe this will be the first time that people know this for sure. We've set the date for the 2024 GRESB America's results event, and it will be at the Empire State Building on Thursday, November 14th. And I'm hoping, cross your fingers, that I can get that building lit up in green.
Ooh, I like that. Start a email about that. We'll like it maybe on LinkedIn, get you a bunch of numbers there to take back to them. Okay. Well, challenge accepted for the Empire State in green. November in New York, and it sounds like August in New York.
No, yeah. So I was going to repeat the dates. October 1st is the birthday. Well, it's the beginning of it, right? So we're going to celebrate 15 years for a whole year. Right. Oh, okay. So October 1st is the GRESB data release this year. That will mark the 15th iteration of the benchmark. And that's the GRESB, the RELPI GRESB. I said GRESB. I'm going to get a €5 fee for that. We're going to have to get that edited out.
Nope, you're stuck with it.
October 1st, RELPI GRESB Institutional Investor Forum, Chelsea Market, New York.
Okay.
Followed by 6 weeks later, November 14th, the GRESB America's results event. Empire
Got
State.
it. And we'll maybe put that in the notes of the podcast for those that want to reference it. And then I know you'll go on the road and have a few other GRESB results events. I know we get excited about hosting one on the West Coast. All the East Coasters, man, that's far. Bring over to the West Coast. We need more sunshine and beach over here. So we'll have one on our end. And I'm sure
so that'll be the third week of October. The week of October 14th is when I'll be on the West Coast at venues to be determined. And then our colleagues in Toronto or in Canada are hosting the UNPRI in person this year. Cool. And so that is the week of October 7th. And so we'll be in Canada for the GRESB Insights event that week.
Fall is always busy, but it's a fun time anytime we can get in person.
I'm willing to admit that because I said GRESB, my face turned red. I'm glad this is a podcast.
Well, I'm sure that everyone can tell from the sound in your voice, but not to worry.
Thank you.
Well, this was really fun, Dan. I love the winters and winters coming back. I know we're going to have a few more of these throughout into the year. We'll bring in other special guests, and anyone is always also welcome to make comments if there's anything you would like us to specifically talk about. But it's just nice to touch base and hear from you directly and continue to share new thoughts with those that want to listen. So thank you for the time.
Always a pleasure, Michelle. This is the best part of my day.
Love to hear it. Really good to see you, Dan. And then this has been another episode of the ESG Experience and special recording of Winters and Winters. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed your time with us, make sure to subscribe to your favorite podcast directory. There's a new episode every month. Thanks to our loyal subscribers for continuing to support our podcast. Want to continue the conversation between episodes? Feel free to follow us on your favorite social media channel at #ESG Experience. Thanks so much.